Okay. If you can, guys, just I know most people like to remain anonymous here and have their videos off and they're muted, their mics muted, which is fine. But just if you can, just let me know you're here. Throw a little hello in the chat area. Also, so I know that you know how to use the chat area, or give me a little wave if you want to use the reactions button. That's also down at the bottom of your screen. Just would like to make sure you're here and with us. And also, if you know that you have any questions, you may put those in the chat at any point. We're going to get started here. So I hope you're all doing well. I know it's not been the greatest of days. These types of days make it even harder being locked up, but we are hopefully having some better weather the rest of the week. And we have a good session for you here today. So Dr. Anthony Rizzuto, who, if you're wondering, he is my brother, but we won't hold that against either of us. He's certainly much smarter than I am, and he's going to talk a little bit today about just some of the or just the lack of resilience in STEM programs here that he sees at the college level. So Dr. Rizzuto, I'll refer to him as that out of respect for this particular webinar. So he's currently professor at Elon University. Prior to joining the faculty at Elon, he was actually an undergrad at Elon, and then went on to receive his PhD at the University of California at Berkeley in physical chemistry. We're going to talk about this kind of growing issue around students' resilience in STEM courses at the college level, and what we can do to better prepare for the college level coursework now. So again, if you have any questions throughout, that's awesome. We want questions. He's here to answer any questions. We hope you can have some tangible takeaways from this in terms of better study habits, better preparation, things like that. So, and we will have a question and answer session at the end of this discussion. So if you just feel like waiting, that's fine as well. But I guess first question, Dr. Rizzuto, let's just kind of start by explaining to everybody what STEM stands for, and also kind of how do those classes differ from to others such as the humanities. So just why don't we start with that, and that'll be a good lead into our discussion today.
For sure. So I just want to reiterate, kind of hopefully what we'll get across at some point here today is that one of the best things you can do to succeed in these STEM courses is to ask questions. So along that vein, make sure if you have questions, ask them. We'll get them answered if we can. STEM courses. STEM is an acronym. Stands for science, technology, engineering, and math. It's a little bit broad-reaching, but they all kind of have a similar bent to them. Math is obviously math. Engineering ranges from civil to electrical to chemical engineering. The technology these days is a little bit, kind of overlaps a little bit with engineering, but has a lot of computer science stuff involved, some coding, stuff along those lines. And then your sciences are going to be your typical lab sciences, your physics, chemistry, biology, stuff along those lines. And one reason they all stand apart, especially relative to like those humanities classes, like your history or your English classes, is we deal in absolutes here. Very rarely is there it could be answer A or answer B. It's very, very rare that that's the case. Almost never. There's not opinions. We don't have opinions here. We have facts that we deal with. And also a lot of this stuff can feel a little abstract, particularly once you start getting into the science stuff. You start talking about biology and physics and chemistry. These are things that you can't see with the naked eye. You have to be clever in order to study them. And so a lot of times it makes it difficult to kind of wrap your head around what's going on. So that's sort of one of the things that makes it tough to understand. History, you can draw analogies and stuff like that. Sometimes you don't get that luxury in STEM.
Got it. Makes sense. And I know that there's some people on here that are different ages. So there may be some of you that are just entering high school or not even quite in high school. Some of you that are further along in high school. You'll see, we'll get into this a little bit here, but there are some this discussion really is for all ages. We're going to talk about preparation and when to start. So why don't we talk about, Dr. Rizzuto, as a college professor, and more specifically, someone that teaches an introductory or foundational class, what sorts of things specifically are you seeing now that are concerning to you at this point? And then, kind of talk about some of the evidences of this lack of resilience that we are seeing in the STEM courses.
So, I mean, let's start off by talking about the types of students that are taking these courses, right? We have anybody, of course, who wants to be a scientist is going to take these STEM courses. But beyond that, anybody who's interested in some sort of medical field, doctor, PA, PT, nursing school, all sorts of people, they have to take these foundational STEM courses. Your general chemistry, your physics, your organic chemistry, stuff like that. And then even beyond that, if you're interested in going into private banking or economics or something along those lines, you want to have a functional knowledge of math. And then even people that are going into policy like to take these STEM courses so they kind of have an understanding when things like environmental policy gets brought up. So we really have a broad range of students that take these classes. And what we're seeing is students struggling more and more. Students struggling at a different level than they struggled with in the past. We have a lot of evidence for this, but one of the main things is frankly anxiety. We've seen drastic increases in student anxiety over their grades, and this is something that we're trying to address, of course. But it's not trivial, right? I mean, grades are important. You're taught since you're 5 years old, 6 years old, that your grades are some of the most important things. And so when we're seeing students study for their test in a way that has worked for them in the past, let's say in high school, and then they don't do very well, oftentimes their response is a panicked frenzy, and that's not productive. And so that's the sort of thing we're trying to address here, is how we can, one, prevent that panic frenzy from the start, but two, if it does happen, and if you end up with a grade that you're not happy with, how do you respond to that? How can you respond to that in a positive way that'll help you move forward and succeed with your future goals?
So, yeah, and we've spoken before too. You mentioned to me that a lot of it has to do with these kids are coming into college with these inflated GPAs, whether it be through AP classes or whatever else, and there's that false sense of security that I took 3 or 4 or 5 AP classes in high school and I got great grades, so now those were college level courses already, so now I'm ready and I should expect A's and B's right away. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so what you're speaking to is a little bit about this idea of being prepared for a college rigor, especially in the STEM courses. We have a couple factors here that are playing a role. The first is exactly what you mentioned, those sort of inflated GPAs, and the fact that if you're doing really well in high school, you might have something like a 4.5 GPA on a 4.0 scale. What does that really mean? Honestly, to me, that's a little bit meaningless. It loses some of its impact once you go off scale. And then there's the idea that, you're taking an AP chemistry class. Well, that means, and if you get an A in AP chemistry, that means that you're going to get an A in college chemistry because they're the same level, and they are not. A better perspective would be to say that maybe an AP chemistry class would be somewhere halfway between your high school chemistry, your regular honors chemistry, and your college level class. And then you have this other idea of grade inflation in high school, but on into college. We're seeing that the average GPA, and I can speak for my institution specifically if we want to talk about that, but the average GPA is in the low 3s, which is above a B, nearly into the A minus. And if average is an A or an A minus, And then when students get a C in one of their first chemistry class, their first physics class, that all of a sudden feels like failing. When of course it's not. A C is of course not failing, but relative to what you're seeing, maybe some of your compatriots in other classes, when you're seeing them put in the same level of effort as you are, and they're getting A's and you're getting C's and D's, you start to think, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. And it's not usually the case. It's a lack of preparedness, a lack of understanding of what it takes to succeed in these courses, and lack of good study habits. Everybody has study habits, but some people and a lot of students these days have very poor study habits, even though they've been successful using them at the high school level.
So you're saying, so you're kind of alluding to that, once you get into college, your perception has to change in terms of what grades mean early on, especially. It's really kind of starts with understanding, where, building that foundation of learning. And I guess, how do we begin to address this problem? How do we kind of adjust these expectations and begin to help students understand how to properly prepare and study, now in high school, where it's, where you can really control this environment, and you can plan ahead and, and be ready going into college and into your later kind of high school years.
Right. So, one thing that I'm very proud of is that it's actually, it sounds silly, but my grade description policy. So on my syllabus, I have what's an A, what does it mean? It's a full paragraph. What is an A? What is a B? What is a C? I have defined a C as if you can do every single homework problem I assign you, if you can do all of the problems in class, and you can do all these things correctly, if you can kind of tell me how to do those things and you can spit them back out on a test, that's a C. People tend to think, oh, I did all the homework problems, I got them all right, I should be getting an A. But that's what I'm telling you, that's at the college level, that's not an A, that's a C. Being able to effectively, it sounds maybe a little harsh, but to regurgitate the same information back, that is C level knowledge. To get an A, you need to be able to take a topic, take these foundational topics that we've learned about in class and that you've studied and that you've worked on the homework and you've worked out on in-class problems and stuff like this, take those and apply them to something you've never seen before. On every single test, I have at least one problem that no student in the class has seen before. And they're like, oh, that was unfair. It's not unfair. I'm asking you to take these foundations and apply them, because that sort of problem solving is what makes an A-level student. That is what I mean when I say exceptional. That word exceptional that stands right next to the letter A in my grade book is the ability to take foundational knowledge and apply it. And that is the sort of thing that we have got to get students to be able to do. And so I think we do a good job of that once they're already in college. For example, students that are at the sophomore level taking general chemistry tend to do significantly better than the first year students taking general chemistry. And it's because they've already kind of adapted to that college mindset, that college level of rigor. So how do you make a first year student more successful? You treat this problem in high school. And it goes to understanding how to study. And that doesn't change necessarily from high school to college. It's more necessary in college. The one thing that I tell my students, and I think it's the best way to study, is you have to fail. You have to struggle. It is all too easy these days to open up the web browser, Google how to do a problem that you're struggling with. That is how you end up with a C or a D in college. I would rather you struggle through a problem for 15, 20, 30 minutes, and then if you still can't figure it out, go talk to your instructor because they're not going to give you the answer, or open up your textbook and kind of revisit those foundations and see if you can apply underlying knowledge that you do know to answer this question that you're struggling with. That's the sort of like the pinnacle of learning right there, is not seeking out the answer, but kind of seeking out that path, that struggle and that failure. That's the best way to learn.
Makes sense. So you're kind of talking about, it's one thing if you're studying English or history or something like that, where you're bringing note cards and you're memorizing things like that. But at the end of the day, the challenge with these STEM courses is that you really can't memorize. This is not memorization, because everything is constantly, it's evolving, right? So you have to really understand the foundational concepts of the theory behind everything. If you can master that, then it's not memorizing certain questions and answers. It's really, you understand the concept, you can answer any of these variations of the question. So that sounds like that's what you're talking about. So talk about then, what are some examples of training methods and support systems that maybe parents can help their kids put in place, or kids can put in place themselves now in high school. And then I assume that evolves a little bit as they do get into college and they have other resources now available to them. But really, we're kind of talking about that, that 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grader right now, maybe an 8th grader. That's, I'm sure that some of these 8th graders are really trying to get prepared as they get ready for private school, prep school, even some of these challenging public school systems. So talk a little bit about those training methods that you'd like to see some of these kids implement now that are going to help them throughout the future.
One of the best methods I can think of is to take your phone and throw it across the room. Get off your computer, get off your device, because that temptation to seek out the answer, it's too tough to Google the thought process behind solving this particular, physics problem. You can't Google a thought process. And so what you end up doing is you're like, oh, I need help. I'm going to Google this. I'm going to try to seek out how to do the problem. What you end up doing is you find a video. People use Khan Academy and stuff like that, or Chegg. Those are common websites that will give you the answer, but will not give you the process. It's that process that you have to kind of go after. The way you do that is you sit down, you take these homework assignments or these in-class problems or whatever that your instructor is giving you. You sit down, get everything else out of the way, and try to solve those problems. When you find a sticking point, when you find yourself starting to struggle, instead of whipping out your phone, pulling out your computer, go talk to the instructor. Go find somebody who is an expert on the subject and have them kind of give you a nudge. I'm good at giving a student a nudge in the right direction without giving them all of the information. That's what makes me an effective teacher. One of the things I hope makes me an effective teacher. As a parent, it may be a little bit more difficult for you to do this in some subjects versus others, but I guess I'm encouraging you guys to not view it as a sign of weakness to go to see your teacher after class. Go to your teacher's office hours or tutoring services or whatever sorts of resources they offer, because there's one thing teachers do is they go into that profession to help students. I promise that we don't do it for the money. And so your first action needs to be to seek help from an expert, and that expert should probably be your instructor first.
So it's interesting. So, and to your point about seeking out your instructors, we just happen to be in this period now where most teachers and educators have more time on their hands than they normally would. So leveraging Zoom, leveraging FaceTime or whatever it may be, is probably even more important now as we're trying to learn remotely. And it's already hard enough in person, but now we're learning remotely. So really leveraging those instructors' free time and scheduling calls or whatever it may be. It sounds like almost like an opportunity in this time.
It absolutely is, and frankly, it's an opportunity that is there more by necessity, especially right now when traditional lectures and the in-class give and take is not there, because the other really, really, really important thing to do is to ask probing questions. When somebody teaches, when your instructor teaches you a concept, it's important to try to think about where this applies. I'm sure we all remember, and especially if you're in high school or middle school right now, you are going to be doing a math problem. And at some point in that textbook, I promise you, part D of problem 4 says, when does this apply to your real life? And for the most part, I remember as a student, I looked at that question and said, well, this is a useless question. What if I want to be a math teacher, right? And now as a teacher, I'm like, wow, that was a missed opportunity for me to kind of see the relevance of what I'm studying, but also to kind of gain that depth and understanding of, because once you find its importance, it sticks with you a little bit more, right? This concept that may seem very abstract and unimportant and just like, oh, I'm just learning this so I can do okay on the test. That's never the case. We're not teaching you, just for the fun of it, right? We actually believe that these skills and this knowledge is important. And so kind of taking a deeper look into each topic that you study and try to figure out where is this really, really relevant. And if you're struggling with that, ask the question. Okay, sometimes that's not an easy thing for you to see, especially if you're in 8th, 9th, 10th grade. You haven't had all of the life experience that's going to make all this stuff make sense. One day you'll look back and be like, oh, of course, that's why they were teaching this. But wouldn't it be better to know it now? And if you know it now, if you can kind of, get that depth of knowledge, the importance sticks with you, but also your recollection for when you are finally examined on it in some way, shape, or form, that will stick with you better, and you'll be able to kind of recall that and end up with hopefully a better grade than what you would have had.
You mentioned early on that asking questions is super important, and I think that to me at least, it seems like a lot of times kids are in class and they're not prepared, so they're feverishly taking notes, and almost everything that the instructor is saying, they're copying down, or what they're writing on the board, or whatever it is, and it takes away from that opportunity to ask questions. So, would you suggest, from a preparedness standpoint, knowing what the next lesson is going to be that following day, that following week, whatever, reading ahead, trying to kind of get a head start so that they can spend more time listening and asking questions in class versus just trying to write as fast as possible and go back home and try and learn it all over again?
The least important thing I do in my job is write on the board. All I'm doing, frankly, is outlining the book on the board so that I can gesture and then talk about the important stuff. So yes, absolutely, reading ahead. For most college level courses, you're going to have a syllabus that's going to say, week 1, we're going to be looking at chapter 1, week 2, chapter 2, et cetera, et cetera. You can stay ahead. Now, of course, that puts the onus on the student to stay ahead. And particularly when you're dealing with these STEM courses, that can be really difficult. They're dense textbooks. Sometimes it's a little overwhelming, and you're like, I have no idea what I just read. It's still better than not reading. Imagine going into a class having never even looked at the material before, okay? Everything you're hearing it for the very first time. New words, new vocabulary, you're hearing for the first time. If you read ahead of time, even just having familiarized yourselves with the vernacular of a subject helps you kind of understand what the instructor is talking about. So, in my opinion, the best way to prepare for a class is to read the chapter once, okay? And then go back over it and say, what are the important points of this chapter? Kind of outline that. And so my best students come into my class with notes on the chapter already. And then what they do is they listen to me, and they have little margins, or they're writing things that I have added, some important stuff that I've added, that they didn't necessarily understand, or that was missing from the textbook, because textbooks have to be limited because they're simply words. Examples that I've done, like, oh, here's a real life example of where this applies. Okay, so they already have their notes, and they already have their questions prepared, and they're like, oh, when this topic comes up, I want to make sure I ask about X, Y, or Z. They ask questions. We have a little back and forth. Participating in class. It seems so simple. And if you're in a class of 30, if you have a question, I promise you 5 other people have that same question. It's not a dumb question. We always say there's no such thing as a dumb question. We really do believe that. Even if it is something relatively simple, actually, especially if it's something relatively simple, ask the question, because that's probably foundational. Once you understand that, maybe 5, 6, 7 other things down the line fall into place. Oh, of course, now it all makes sense, right? That's the sort of thing you have to be able to do. And it's easier said than done, that confidence of raising your hand in front of a classroom full of peers. Easier said than done, but it's so important. I saw this when I taught it. I taught it a class of 500 students at Berkeley and a class of 30 students at Elon. My students at Elon learn better because they're willing to ask questions, as opposed to raising your hand in front of 500 peers, which is tough. That's
a good segue into, maybe we can encourage people to ask questions here on this Zoom call. So I think that kind of covers what we were going to discuss via the interview discussion here. So if there are any questions, that would be a great time to ask. You can either unmute yourself and turn on your video and ask, or even keep your video off if you're shy and ask, or put it in the chat room, whatever is best for you. We would like to answer some questions that you may have. So we'll spend a couple minutes here going through whatever questions you have. Don't make it awkward. Ask some questions. I know you have them. While you're thinking of your questions, I will say that we have a this conversation we're having today is a good kind of segue into our webinar later this week on Wednesday, where we're gonna interview 2 high-level athletes. They played lacrosse at Cornell and also went on to pre-med, and so you can imagine how hard it is balancing study habits and being prepared while also playing a high-level sport. So this is very important. So we have a question here. How about increased resilience in early ages? Is it any different than what you would have discussed? What do you think?
I mean, I suppose it depends on how early ages you're really talking about. I think kind of from 9th grade on, you're going to want to kind of steer away from any sort of the being a little bit more sensitive. I see now we're talking maybe closer to 3rd grade and 7th grade. All right, so those are going to be two different sort of treatments, I think. For a 3rd grader, you want to make sure you keep them interested and engaged. I will say this, a little caveat here. All of my teaching experiences come at the high school and collegiate level. So 3rd grade is a little bit out of my expertise. But I imagine that you have a little bit more trouble kind of keeping them locked onto a subject. So I think make sure you keep it interesting and keeping it relevant, which we did talk about, right? Making sure that they understand the importance and relevance of it. But also making the grade less important, especially for, a 3rd grader, and honestly for a 7th grader as well, making that grade less important. Let them be okay with failure and celebrate it to some extent, because if you're able to struggle through a problem on the homework, you're going to get it right on the test, right? If you work really, really hard and fail 3, 4, 5 times, fine, because on the test, you're not going to do that again. Now you've got it. So really just kind of encouraging them to kind of stay focused and really trust the process, I guess.
And so it's a good kind of that triggers something that we have also a question here as well. But putting less now. Obviously, we don't want to say grades don't matter, because grades do matter from a certain but if you put more emphasis on the study habits and understanding the concepts and less on the grades, that very well could reduce a lot of the anxiety we see in this incredibly competitive athletic and academic area that we live in and around the country, and what we're seeing a lot of these high school kids go through. So putting more emphasis on understanding the concepts and the foundations of learning, less on the grades. Do you see that as reducing anxiety?
Yeah, so maybe I should specify. When I say don't worry about the grade, your final grade is the only grade that actually does matter. Let me give you an example. My homework grade is worth 4% of the overall grade. They could literally get 0 homework problems right for the entire semester and get a 96 in the class, which is of course an A. The reason I do that is because I don't want students to be trying anything they can do, everything in their power to get every homework problem right. I don't care if they get every homework problem right. In fact, I choose homework problems that I know they'll struggle through because I want them to struggle. I would much rather you lose 4% in homework and then get the 70% test grade kind of more correct. So when I say the grade doesn't matter, I mean an individual grade in a course doesn't matter. Of course, the ending grade matters to some extent. Your GPA certainly matters, but it's certainly not the end all be all. Letters of recommendation and stuff like that, and they're going to be much more important. But what I find is that when students prepare correctly, they do that struggling, they trust me, and that screwing up a couple homework problems is okay. They end up doing better on the test, and then all of a sudden they're like, that worked. And they're more relaxed, they have reduced anxiety. And so kind of trusting the process and preparing correctly, I think if they really dive in and really buy into it, that's where you see that reduction in anxiety. And that's a snowball effect, right? Once you've reduced your anxiety, all of a sudden you're better rested, you can study more, you can study more efficiently. We haven't really talked about efficient study habits yet, and we can talk about that if people have questions about it. But absolutely, kind of diving into this and really trusting the process is a very real way to reduce anxiety.
Awesome. Yeah. Another question here. What are some of the most major differences between college course and an AP course in high school?
An AP course, I'm going to use chemistry as my example here because it's frankly what I'm more comfortable with. But your AP courses are going to tend to be a little bit more linear. You're going to have a question that's one topic, and I want you to answer this one topic. I'm evaluating on this one topic. Very rarely do I write a problem for my exams that involves one topic. We are more of it's more of a synthesis type thing. I want you to bring in 2, 3, 4 topics to get topic 5, to understand this new thing. So that's what makes a difficult class and a difficult problem. You have to understand the foundations of topics 2, 3, 4, and 5, or 1, 2, 3, and 4, so that you can do the problem to understand this 5th component. And so it's that sort of idea of synthesis that takes our college level STEM courses to the next level. Does that make sense?
Great. So another question here. What do you think is the biggest factor in a teacher determining a grade?
Phew, that is you're asking about the secrets behind the grade book here. Listen, frankly, the math. I've got a set thing, my homework is 4%, my tests are 70%, my in-class assignments are whatever percent. It's going to add up to 100%, and whatever they get out of 100% is their grade. But that's, of course, not the whole story. If I see somebody working, buying into it, really working hard, and they have a 79.9, it's an 80. If I see somebody slacking off and not putting the effort in, that's 79.9, frankly. And that's the difference between a C plus and a B minus. That's a huge shift in your GPA. I firmly believe that work ethic should be rewarded, and that's how I do it. The other thing I do is I actually look at trajectory. So let's say that a student's first test grade they get, I can use a real example here. I had a student that got a 24 on her first test out of 100. Of course she panicked. She said, oh my God, I'm never going to be a doctor. Test 2, she got something in the 70s. Test 3, she got something in the 90s. And then on the final exam, she got like a high B. That's upward trajectory. That means that all of a sudden she learned what it took. The 24 on the first test was not an accurate evaluation of her understanding the material. It was an evaluation of her preparedness and her study habits. And so with the math ended up being roughly a C, she was clearly a B plus student. And so that is taken into account, for me at least.
That's great. So, to kind of wrap this all up here. So, your issue with the lack of resilience in STEM and the kind of growing issue just is it really boils down to study habits, to the learning kind of environment that they're in, and we have in this area, in our area of the Northeast, I would imagine that the STEM courses and those majors are one of the most popular, and whether it be the medical field or banking or some type of finance. So smart, you've always said smart kids come in their first year of college and they fail because they're not prepared, and they think they have to pivot, and they need to say, this is not for me. I got to get out of here because I'm just going to fail, and my future is toast. That's very common, it sounds like. And there is a way to combat that now, and it really kind of it's really about study skills,
Mm-hmm.
being prepared, how to learn, basically learning how to learn, right? And so
those
are some, yeah.
I didn't mean to
and
interrupt
so
you.
those are things. Go ahead.
Learning how to learn is a huge factor of it, and but the other thing is to pivot when you realize what you're doing is wrong. Don't just keep banging away the same way. If it didn't work for the first test, it's probably not going to work for the second test. And so the phrase that I use for my class all the time is change a habit. If you're not sure which habit to change, come talk to me. Let me help you. I want to help you. You know how much harder it is to grade a bad test than it is to grade a good test? An A, check. I want you to do well for many reasons. So use those resources. Change a habit is a really good kind of catchphrase that I use, and I think that resonates a little bit.
So you're encouraging all these young people, these middle schools and high schools, to really kind of engage in that now, and don't wait till to college. Engage in that now. And so when we talk more about, like in the future of these webinars, talking about study skills, organization skills, time management, things like that, those are things now, if they can master that now, it's going to help them obviously short term with their high school classes, but it will prepare them for college, and not, it'll allow them to take that path that they think they want to go to and be successful.
Absolutely. And there's two other things to remember here. We're talking about this, like, okay, you can struggle in a class. That doesn't mean your dreams are over. That idea of trajectory doesn't have to be maintained within a single class. If you've got a student that gets a C in Gen Chem and then a C in organic chemistry, but then they get a B in biochemistry and then an A in quantum mechanics, it's like, okay, well, they learned something. They figured something out. This is a bright student. This is a problem-solving student. That's what these disciplines want. They want problem solvers. Not just within that discipline. We're teaching a mindset here, right? As a doctor, as a medical doctor, you are not going to be doing a ton of organic chemistry. You'll be doing no organic chemistry. But the thought process behind, solving those types of problems, that's what a doctor needs. A doctor needs that mentality. And then
That's what any employer needs, by the way.
absolutely, any employer. I'm a little biased in my field, so of course. So,
Well, and Dr. Rizzuto, I mean, to start looking back on where you started the conversation, we really should be kind of doubting and looking into all of these A's our kids have. We really should be questioning that, because they are getting these 4 and 5s on their APs when they're juniors or whatever, and may or may not be setting up for failure. So just this is like a checkpoint to really don't believe in our own, or perhaps our own inflated grades of our children.
You're absolutely correct, Tara. And one actually piece of evidence for that is this: you see a lot of A's in these AP classes. You don't see that many 5s on the AP exams. A 5 on the AP exam is a much better indicator than an A in the class, in my opinion. Still is not a replacement for a college level course. In fact, at Elon, we do not let a chemistry major who gets a 5 on the AP exam, we don't let them place out. We know that they're not going to be ready. And then, I mean, you're kind of, I don't want to say doubting those A's, but if you feel like your student is putting in the bare minimum effort and getting an A, that's when you really want to question it. And if I'm talking to parents here and stuff like that, you know, the onus has to be on the students. You have to get them trained to study correctly on their own. But you can guide them in that way. You can kind of help them set up a schedule and what's an efficient way to study and what's an inefficient way to study. And if people have questions about that sort of thing, I'm happy to talk about that as well. There's some really simple things that people tend to forget about.
Great. Well, thanks a lot for your time. And again, check in with us on Wednesday, because you'll hear from 2 guys that lived it. 2 lacrosse players that went to an Ivy League, that successfully competed at a high level in Division I sports, and also you know, and went the pre-med route successfully. And so, you know, kind of what we're talking about today, they lived it, and you can hear their personal experiences, their personal failures and successes, and what worked for them, and tips from them. So, and then next week we'll really kind of dive into, you know, classes about study skills and time management and organization and these things we're talking about. This is not throwaway stuff. This is some of the most important stuff that we can be doing right now. So anyway, thanks again, Dr. Rizzuto. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us. And if anybody has any questions, you can always reach us at 360@centercourtclub.com. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.